Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be breaking down our predictions for how the WSL table is going to look like for next season, here on She Scores Bangers. I have been genuinely counting down the days for when we're going to kick off the WSL. It's next weekend, it's so close, so let's dive into it. So we're going to be starting from the bottom of the table and climbing upwards. In that 12th spot, in that red zone spot, that means relegation, it is looking like it's going to be Leicester City. Last season, Leicester finished 11th, and we're actually kind of in a relegation race with Birmingham City until the last 4, 5, or 6 games that they had, where Birmingham City had kind of a tough run of games, and it looked like it was going to be Birmingham going down, and that's exactly what happened. And so Leicester was kind of a little bit saved, but only by a few points. Going into the season, I really thought they needed to have a very busy transfer window, specifically in kind of that midfield. Honestly, pretty much everyone on the pitch. They lacked to score goals. They lacked to produce attacks in the middle. They also were very poor when it came to defending, and so there was a lot of areas they needed to work on, and that really wasn't the case. They released 4 players. They had a Dutch defender who was out on free agency, didn't really bother to get her contract again. They sent out 2 young players on loan, and so not only were they getting rid of a lot of players, which can sometimes be good in terms of you're trying to save money, or you're releasing these players, you don't want paying those bills, but you'd also expect in return is that you're saving that money to get in a fair amount of players or to buy this very big player, which also wasn't the case. The biggest one you could say was Josie Green from Spurs that they were able to bring in, but other than that, it was a really poor window. It looked like they just went to sleep. I don't know what the board is doing, and I don't see how they're going to survive relegation again with probably a weaker squad this time around. Ahead of them in the 11th spot, it is Brighton, who actually finished 7th last season, which is not terrible at all. Now, the reason they're placing quite low this time around is that they have lost a lot of very valuable players. Maya Letizia was an absolute rock in the back for them. Ellie Brazil, very, very good, producing forward runs when she needed to. Nick Kirkendijk and Inessa Kagman, the Dutch defender and midfielder, they were both very important in how Brighton play their game. Again, both lost. Overall, they lost 10 players, which isn't necessarily a bad thing sometimes, but they didn't necessarily replace these positions, and so I think Hope Powell is going to have some issues this season. It looked like a rather dry transfer window for them this time around. In number 10, we have Reading, who finished 8th last season. Unlike the 2 previously discussed teams, they've only lost 2 players, one for retirement and one they just sent out on free agency. They got Diane Caldwell from United, who is a very, very experienced defender. They got Charlie Wellings from Celtic, who was able to score 40 goals in 34 appearances, a very, very good number. Becky Jane also returns to the club after leaving in 2019, and so the players that they were able to get have very good experience outside and inside the WSL, and so they've got good experience, good veterans, and it's paired up pretty nicely with the amount of young players they have on the roster anyway. West Ham United, who is known to have the highest turnover of squads in the WSL, didn't actually have that title this time around. It was Manchester City. But they had to stick with tradition and have quite a busy transfer window anyway regardless. They were able to get a few Arsenal players, some who were on the senior squad and some from the academy. They also snatched Viviane Assailly from Bayern Munich, the French forward, for an undisclosed fee. That's really going to help them score goals. She's quite a technical player too, so definitely a very good quality player to have on your squad. I would say the reason they dropped a few rankings here is that they let go of some really good players as well. Julie, their captain, had her contract be up, and it was announced that the club was letting her, so she was not announced the contract. Katrina Svitkova, I hope I said that correctly, also went over to Chelsea. She was such an important role in that midfield for them, always had a ton of energy. The cherry on top for all this is that they're working with a new manager. The current manager was the assistant manager last season. It's always extremely interesting to see those assistant managers shift over and become the main managers, how they're able to adapt and how they're able to kind of take that extra responsibility, that extra commitment, and so I'm sure it's going to take some time adjusting. A pretty fair and good preseason. Yui, the Japanese international, was on fire, but with the amount of new players coming in and a new manager, it's going to take some time adjusting, and that might be very costly at the end. On top of them, we have the newly promoted Liverpool team, which means we're going to be getting some airside derbies. Yes! They released a few players that looked like weren't really ready for that kind of WSL level. What the board was really good in doing is that, sure, they released a few amount of players, but they kept the players that they need. They renewed the contracts that they need. The players that played a huge role in getting them promoted, they made sure they kept. They also brought back Shanice van de Sodden, which has already played at Liverpool. She fits in so well. I already spoke about this, but it kind of like Liverpool runs through her even though she's Dutch. But when you see her speaking about the team and Liverpool and just the club as a whole, it's hard not to admire and see the passion on her. They were also able to get Julie, who we just spoke about from West Ham. I also could not pronounce her last name, hence why I'm keeping out her last name, Flaherty. I don't know how to say it. Regardless, I'm just so excited to see how they can fit in. They also released a documentary about their promotion, which I will keep a link down below because you definitely need to go over and watch it before we kick off the season. Moving over to the 7th spot, I think I will say it's going to be a toss-up between them and Everton. Either they finish in 6th and Everton finish in the 7th, or vice versa, which is what I've placed right now. They've brought in Rachel Daly. It's exactly what any mid-table team needed, which is a ruthless, experienced attacking forward. On top of that, they got French midfielder Kanzadali. Very, very good signing. Simone Miguel, I was so impressed with her at the Euros. Honestly, she's so good. I know she's out with an injury right now, but hopefully not too long until she's back, on the pitch and everything. In the back, they've got Anna Patten on loan from Arsenal. She's going to surprise some people with how good she is in the back. I've watched her performances in the national team over the summer. She's been so good. I honestly so excited to see how Aston Villa does this season. Now, Everton, I know they're ranked 6th when they finished 10th last season. They had a bunch of crises going on last season, but I just have a good feeling about them this time around. Again, they could maybe finish 7th rather than 6th, and as Aston Villa ahead of them, it could be in a completely different position like any other prediction we're making. Something about having Jess Park up front is telling me it's going to be a good one. They also brought in 3 experienced Danish players who played together on the international scene, so chemistry issues are not going to be present because these players already know how to play with each other. And Everton didn't necessarily have a bad squad last season. I think the roster was actually pretty solid. They were simply mismanaged. They were simply not given the opportunity to do good. They had managers come in, leave, and honestly a ton of uncertainty for these players, and finishing 10th made sense for the situation they were in. They did lose a few players, but they brought in who they needed, and they kept who they really needed to keep. Either it's going to be another disappointment, and they're probably going to finish 10th, or finally we're going to see the squad actually reach its potential and do pretty good, which hopefully they do good. Hopefully they finish 6th, 7th. It would be a pretty good showing. We're cracking into the top 5 right now, and our first team on the top 5 list is Tottenham. They finished 5th. They're probably going to finish 5th again. Spurs' biggest issue last season was not scoring enough goals. If I remember correctly, they went on a 6-game streak and scored nothing. And if you're trying to break into that top 3, top 4, not scoring enough goals is going to cause you a lot of issues. They tried to solve this by bringing in Ellie Brazil, Ramona Pittsburgher, Drew Spence, as well as a young Norwegian forward player. But another question that was pondering is, was it really the players not able to score, or was it the coaching tactics, the game plan that the manager was putting in, that it simply didn't allow those players to convert enough balls into goals? The second question is now easier to answer because Skinner has a new set of players that she's going to be dealing with. And if those players also aren't able to score goals, then it's probably an issue with how the training is going. It's probably an issue with the game plan that Skinner is trying to do. They lost Clemeron in the midfield. I'm kind of intrigued to see how they adapt to that as well, with Pittsburgher now in that position instead. Heading over to the 4th spot. Now, I think this might be a little bit of a controversial opinion, but I think it's Manchester City finishing in that 4th spot this year. They literally had the most disastrous start last season, which at some point they were sitting 7th in the table. That was such a weird thing to look at. But once that disaster kind of finished up, those injuries were healed up, they got back on track, Manchester City fashion. Some of the big games, won those mid-table games, and were able to push really down to the wire to that 3rd spot. Speaking of which, last season not only was it a race between the 1st and the 2nd spot, but it was also a race between that 3rd and 4th spot, and I don't think it's going to be any different now. Me confidently saying that I think City will end up in that 4th position doesn't mean it's not going to go down to the wire. Losing the players that they've lost pretty much their entire midfield. Stanway, Ware, and Walsh, gone. Lucy Bronze, gone. Ellen White, gone. And those were not bench players. Those were your starting 11 players. That's kind of where the biggest issue is. Losing Walsh is pretty much the last straw. Sure, you're getting a ton of money for it, but with a few days left of the transfer window, do you have any plans of putting a backup person in that position? So that midfield position is really worrying. They've got very talented players in there, very young prospects as well. But number one, I wonder, is there going to be chemistry issues where it's going to take you time for these midfielders to get used to playing with each other? How long is that adjustment period going to last? Because Gareth Taylor is also working with a ton of young players, is he really the right manager to growing these players? If I had to answer that question, I'm probably going to say no. City has always had a very good roster, very good players, but it almost looks like after 2 or 3 years with Gareth being in here, it's a plateau. There's no wonder when these players have an opportunity to leave, they're getting the hell out of there. It's not easy for an English player to go out to these European countries and look like they're having the best time of their life when they were playing at City beforehand. There's some serious questions about what is going on in the club. How did they manage to let go of Kira Walsh, and what are they planning to do now that they've got that deal done and Kira Walsh is left? What's their plan? How are you moving forward? How are you planning to reinforce that midfield? What's going to happen now? So there's a lot of questions to be answered on the pitch, but there's also a ton of other questions to be answered in the locker room, in the board. What's Gareth Taylor do? I mean, are we going to see a sacking in this season? I wouldn't be surprised if it is to be him. But the real qualities and unique qualities of a manager are shown when the team is going through a crisis like this. So Gareth Taylor has a lot of proving to do for myself, for the fan base, for the players, for the club. He needs to please a lot of people. Stealing that third spot and cracking into the Champions League, I feel like Manchester United is destined to do it. Skinner loves to play Alessio Russo on the wing. I never want to see that happen again. If he is not playing her solely in that 9 position, get him out of there. Like, just imagine Russo up top, Toon behind her, Leon and Garcia right with her. Like, brilliant. In the back, they're going to have Maya Letitia on a Batier, also Millie Turner going back into things. That's a very solid backline. Mary Earps has done wonders. So I think United has done great to get good players. You most definitely cannot forget about Nikita Paris. She unfortunately did not have a good run with Arsenal, but she's a player who has won the Champions League. I'm still doing pretty well with the United girls on the national team, and I don't see why she's not going to be able to flourish and really have a good form this time around. Now, moving on to the top 2. I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people to agree with me on this. It's really either Chelsea or Arsenal. Before we put that stamp prediction on them, let's just break them down. Starting off with Chelsea, who arguably had one of the best transfer windows this summer, also the winners of last season. They've brought in Katrina Svitkova, Buchanan, which is absolutely huge, Joanna Writing, Kankovic, Eva Perisic. I mean, the list is so long. Everybody knew they were going to have a busy transfer window because of the announced departures before the end of the season. G obviously left, Loopholes is pregnant, neither of them are going to be present, and both of them, you could say, were kind of frequent starters for Chelsea. I'm very excited to see who is going to take that G role. Is it going to be one of the new signings? Is it going to be Guro maybe shifting towards the middle? Is it going to be Cuthbert pulling forward? I don't know. On top of that, as another question is, what kind of formation is Emma Hayes wanting to play? With Buchanan obviously joining in, you've got plenty of center backs, but the 3 main big center backs are Eriksson, Buchanan, and Millie Bright. I personally don't see a world where you're not putting Buchanan and Millie Bright together. That's going to exclude Magda Eriksson. There was a few times that she did have to shift and play in that left back position, but I personally don't rate her there. We know it's probably going to be Eve Perisic on the other end, but is Emma Hayes going to be playing a back 4? Is she going to be... What Emma Hayes is doing in the back is also going to be a very interesting question. She did play with the formation and the amount of players that were playing in the back during preseason, which was very fun to watch, but it was very noticeable that Eriksson is not a fullback and really should not be playing in that left back position. Up top, there's not much to worry about. You've got Harder, Bething, Lind, Kerr. It's a goal machine up there. Nothing to worry about. Another thing that played an important role in how Chelsea did very good in the league last season was they were knocked out of the Champions League in the group stages, which meant they could just focus on the domestic cups and the league once they were out of the Champions League. Arsenal finished 1 point behind Chelsea last season, with their only loss being to the relegated side Birmingham City. Signings this transfer window only bringing in 2 players. That's it. Just 2. With that being said, though, they did renew Viv Miedema's contract, Steph Catley, Catherine Ford, some very crucial players that they needed to keep. Lena Hurting, who they reportedly paid over 250,000 euros for, doesn't get the credit she really deserves. She's such a versatile forward that can play in any of the forward positions, which is not an easy thing to do. You want her up the wings? She can run up the wings and send in crosses. You want her in the middle? She got you in the box. She's tall, she's lengthy, she can jump for headers, corners. She's got very good qualities. The biggest issue comes is you don't have a backup defender necessarily. You don't have a backup defensive midfielder. You also don't have a backup for Beth Mead. Is Jordan Nobbs finally going to get more playtime? What's her role in the midfield? Is Leah Williamson going to be pulling up into that defensive midfielder? Are we going to have Lotta and Rafa link up in the back? Good questions that we're just going to have to wait and see for. Jonas is a very clever man. I'm sure he has answers for all these questions that we're proposing. When I saw his coverage and commentating, kind of any work that he did throughout the Euros, he's a very articulate man. He knows how to put his answers together, so I really, really rate him. Viviana Miedema going back to the midfield is going to be really fun. A lot more fun than what people realize. What she can do on the pitch is absolutely incredible. How she can build attacks, I think just her IQ is insane. I love watching her play. Arsenal has been very secretive on their preseason. They've been very secretive on any of the staff members that they brought in from the back room, from the technical staff. What are their priorities? I would love to see them. They have to win a domestic cup, a League Cup. Something has to come out of this season. If I was them, I'd probably sacrifice Champions League and try to get the league and a domestic cup. But it also does depend on how Chelsea's doing, and so it's going to be really interesting. It's probably going to go down to the wire again between these two. I'm going to have to go with my heart. Something is telling me Arsenal is going to be able to pull it off this time around. I just think maybe Chelsea brought in one too many extra players, and having to please all of them and adjust and adapt with that many new players might be tricky in some stressful situations. But then again, Emma Hayes is Emma Hayes, and really, who am I to question her? She knows exactly what she's doing, and she most definitely has a plan. Most of these clubs have sold their season tickets, which is absolutely phenomenal. The season hasn't even kicked off yet. Please do share your thoughts on these predictions. If you agree or you completely disagree with each and every single one of them, I want to hear your opinions. And hey, let's have a good season. We're going to be bringing you plenty of videos on it. It's going to be a good one. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us on Twitter. I will see you later.